Our third passage for closed passage reading. The large number of natural disasters within a few days in late September has led to two assumptions. First, we are experiencing more natural calamities today ever before. And second, the distribution of disasters unequal. A UN report that studied natural disasters 1975 and 2007 found that not only is the of catastrophes increasing because of climate change and environmental but also that the brunt of tragedies is borne poor countries least equipped to deal with such It is true that some countries are disaster prone, but some Japan for example, have managed to overcome their geographical disadvantages. To UN estimates, equivalent populations in the Philippines and Japan the same number of cyclones each year, but 17 times more people perish in the Philippines than in Japan. In some ways, natural disasters give developed economics an excuse for technological improvement, while in poorer ones it feeds a vicious cycle, since they are constantly struggling to recover from natural calamities. They cannot afford the disaster prevention measures needed. So, having read the passage, we understand that the main focus or the main theme of the passages has to do with natural disasters, right? Calamities. So we have an idea and we understand usually we would be needing negative words associated with this particular concept, right? So now let's look at each of the blank. Let's look at our options. Let's see what are the techniques that we're going to apply to identify the right fit. The large number of natural disasters within a few days in late September has led to two assumptions. What are the two assumptions? First, we are experiencing more natural calamities today ever before. Let's look at our options for blank one. As, then, not, of, since. Okay. Now, if you look at these options, this is a collocation, which means you've heard people use this expression repeatedly in various contexts. Are you able to identify the collocation? Today, then, ever before. Option 2. Right? Today, then, ever before. That's a collocation right there for you. So, for our blank one, the option is 2. Let's go ahead and write that down. And what is the second assumption? The distribution of disasters unequal. Now this is a little tricky because sometimes when it comes to subject-verb agreement, we kind of tend to miss out what is the subject. Now in this phrase, if you notice, it says the distribution of disasters unequal. Let's look at our options first for the second blank. I have being, are, often, is, seen. The distribution of disasters unequal. I know I need a helping verb, right? And all my options are pretty much helping verbs, for often, right? It's an adverb of frequency. Being, are, is, and then again I have seen, which is a static verb, right? Appears, seems, all of that. So, looking at my options, I need to choose between option 2 or option 4, because all the other three don't fit the option logically, right? You don't say the distribution of disasters seem unequal or often unequal or being unequal. I know for a fact that definitely 1 and 3 can't be. But what about seem? Why can't it be seem? We're going to understand why it can't be seem. Now what is the subject here for us? Let's identify that first. Yeah, the subject here is not the disasters. The subject here is actually the distribution. That's the subject, right? Which is talking about a single commodity. One particular aspect. The distribution. So, it's a singular subject, which means I need a singular verb. And that's why, even though seem sounds right, I can't use it because seem is a plural verb. Seems with an S would be the singular verb. Matching the singular subject, the distribution. So here, the distribution of disasters is unequal from the remaining options that are left. Option 4 is. So let's make that change. Moving forward, a UN report that studied natural disasters 1975 and 2007 found that not only is so I have a comparison here, and there are two specific years mentioned, 1975 and 2007. So a UN report that studied natural disaster, it has to be somewhere along the lines of 1975 and 2007. Let's look at our options for option 3. After, prior, between, separating, affecting. I know clearly I don't even have to waste time for this blank. It's obviously option 3 because there are 2 specific years given and we're looking at something happening between these 2 time frames. Alright, a UN report that studied natural disasters between 1975 and 2007 found that not only is the dash of catastrophes increasing because of climate change and environmental dash, but also that the brunt of tragedies is borne dash poor countries least equipped to deal with such dash. Now if you look at this entire sentence, there are 4 blanks in this very sentence, right? So let's understand what do we need here. Found that not only is the dash of catastrophes. Okay, so let's look at our options for blank 4. Response, dances, occurring, damage, frequency. We're talking about the number of times these catastrophes are happening. So obviously, bringing in the meaning of number is option 5, the frequency. Okay, so let's make that change. The frequency of catastrophes is increasing because of climate change and environmental what? So when catastrophes happen, something negative is going to be the end result, right? The consequence of that is something detrimental. So let's look at our options and see which word gives me the meaning of something detrimental. Degradation, protection, detriment, audit, summit. I have the word detriment there, but is it in the right form? Obviously, it can't be protection. It's a positive word. Option 2 is out. What about option 4 and option 5? These are words that do not logically fit the context, right? We're not talking about any audit here. We're not talking about a summit. What's a summit? A summit is it's more like a conference, right? We're not referring to that. We'll have to choose between degradation and detriment. So, what can be the answer in this context? If you look at it, change and environmental degradation, right? I need a noun form very clearly. Environmental is in the adjective form describing what sort of degradation. What is degradation? Degradation, something that causes some sort of disaster, or rather something that's wearing off, right? Something that's making the entire place more worse than what it was. So environmental degradation, but also that the brunt of tragedies is borne dash poor countries least equipped to. So the brunt of tragedies is borne. This again is a collocation if you ask me. But if you do you notice this word borne? It's actually the past participle of bear, right? Bear. Yeah, bear as in to endure, to suffer. Correct? So borne is the past participle of the base verb bear. So, but also that the brunt of tragedies is borne by who, right? It's in the passive voice. So obviously I need the preposition by. Borne by. Is that what my options give? Let's look at the 6th. I have of, by, with, for and on, right? Is borne by. Is borne by again is a collocation. It's a set expression used repeatedly at various contexts. So the option for 6th one is option 2, by. Let's go ahead and put that down. Right? Brunt of tragedies borne by poor countries least equipped to deal with such what? What are my options for option 7? Such calm, such misbelief, such misfortunes, such faith, such mistake. I know it definitely can't be the positive words, right? I can immediately eliminate 1 and 4. Calm and faith out. Not the right words in terms of logic. What about 2nd, 3rd and 5th? Misbelieve, inappropriate word again in the context. We're not talking about any misbelief here. Misfortunes seems the apt word, the appropriate word in terms of logic, right? What's a misfortune? A misfortune is something that you don't want happening to someone, right? It's just unfortunate that something like that should happen. So the context, what is the context telling you? That's exactly what the context is telling you. It says, but also the brunt of tragedy is borne by poor countries least equipped to deal with such misfortunes. Let's put that down. Not misbelief, not mistake. Moving on, it is true that some countries are disaster prone, but some dash Japan, for example. Let's look at our options for 8th. In spite, even, since, how, like. In spite Japan, even Japan, since Japan, how Japan, like Japan. What is it? I have a clue word right there. You know, right after the context, I have something called for example. So, they're taking Japan as an example. So, what's the right fit here? Like Japan. Yeah, made that change. For example, and managed to overcome their geographical disadvantages. Alright. Dash to UN estimates equivalent populations in the Philippines and Japan dash the same number of cyclones each year, but 17 times more people perish in the Philippines than in Japan. So, they're using Japan as an example and then they're comparing it with Philippines. Let's look at our options for blank 9. Thanks, comparing, similar, according, linked. So, there is a UN estimate. So, obviously, from the options given, thanks to UN estimates, there's nothing to thank here. We're talking about catastrophe, a disaster, something unfortunate, a misfortune, right? So, I can take away positive words like thanks. So option 1 is eliminated. What about comparing or similar or linked or according? Linked to UN estimates doesn't make sense. Option 5, it doesn't sound right. It's not logically fitting the context. Comparing to UN estimates equivalent populations of the Philippines, there is no other estimate that is compared here. The estimate that they're talking about is UN estimate, which is that particular estimate, right? So comparing, again, inappropriate word. Similar to UN estimates, no. We haven't spoken about any estimate previous or prior to this sentence, so it cannot be similar. The only other option that we're left with is according, option 4, and that would be the right fit in this context. So let's go ahead and make that change. According to UN estimates, equivalent populations in the Philippines and Japan dash the same number of cyclones each year. Again, let's look at our options for blank 10. Endure, incite, enjoys, trigger, encounters. Again, we're talking about disasters. I don't need positive words. I can take away enjoys. Okay. And I can also take away trigger. Trigger is to start something. Is that what the context is conveying? Absolutely not. So the context says, according to UN estimates, equivalent populations in the Philippines and Japan dash the same number of cyclones each year. But 17 times more people perish in the Philippines than in Japan. Basically, they're talking about this calamity that they have to bear. They have to undergo. Right? So, what's the right word where you're bearing such a disaster, such an unfortunate incident? Is it trigger? Is it encounter? Is it incite? Or is it endure? What would be the right word? Now, some of you might come back and say it could be option 1, endure. Some of you might come back and say it could be option 5, encounters. What's incite? Incite again is to start something, but that's again not, that's almost close to trigger, right? Those two words don't fit logically. We're looking at option 1 and option 5. Out of option 1 and option 5, let's look at what's the right context. So, if you look at the context again, it says equivalent populations of Philippines and Japan endure the same number of cyclones or encounter the same number of cyclones. If I have to use encounter, the problem is we're talking about a plural subject here, right? We're talking about Philippines and Japan. They encounter. So if I have to use option 5, I need to get rid of the S, but I can't do that, right? So encounters, which is the singular verb, will not fit the plural subject here, which is Philippines and Japan. And that's why we go with option 1, which is endure. Endure means is to bear, unfortunately, right? This catastrophe. So there we go. For our last blank, it's option 1, endure. And then all our 10 blanks are complete, right? So what have we used? If you look at it, if you look at the third passage, we've used a little bit of collocations, we've used subject-verb agreement, right, in 2 blanks, blank 2 and the last blank. We've also used prepositions, we've looked at logic We've tried to understand. We've also looked at a little bit of passive voice, past participle, forms again is something that we've looked at. So pretty much context helping us and also other language components helping us to identify the right fit. So far we've looked at three fact-based or concept-based passages. Let's look at a couple of story-based passages and see how much more easier it is to arrive at the answers for that type of a passage.